I sit quietly on the suede sofa watching his mother slide the divorce agreement across the glass table. My husband stares at his shoes, faking guilt, while his mistress stands on the porch smiling with her newborn. They think they are kicking an infertile woman out of this $1 million Winnetka mansion to build their perfect family. But the paper I just signed guarantees their entire empire will burn to ashes before tonight is over. Hello to the wonderful listeners of Violet Revenge Stories. Sadly, YouTube has disabled our monetization feature, leaving us without a budget to keep the channel running. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating more stories for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. My name is Kylie Johnson. I am 32 years old, and I work as a financial data forensics analyst at Stratus Data Forensics. Returning to Illinois from a grueling business trip, all I craved was the quiet sanctuary of my home. The drive from the airport had been exhausting, and my mind was still buzzing with spreadsheets and offshore accounts. However, the moment I stood on the grand front porch of our Winnetka mansion, that sanctuary shattered. I slid my key into the brass lock, but it refused to turn. The familiar click of the mechanism was absent. The locks had been changed. A cold breeze swept across the porch as I pressed the doorbell. Minutes stretched on before the heavy oak door creaked open. Our longtime housekeeper stood there, her eyes darting nervously to the floor as she stepped aside, scurrying away without a single word of greeting. The air inside the foyer felt thick, heavy with an unnatural anticipation. I dragged my suitcase over the threshold, the wheels clicking loudly against the polished marble floor. As I stepped into the expansive living room, I realized I had walked into a meticulously staged ambush. A family tribunal was waiting in absolute silence. My mother-in-law, Victoria, commanded the center of the beige suede sofa. Her posture was rigidly straight, her chin tilted upward in that familiar, condescending manner she had perfected over the years. She looked like a queen preparing to banish a peasant. Beside her sat my husband, Julian, or rather, the man who was legally my husband. He kept his gaze firmly glued to the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. His shoulders slumped in a pathetic display of feigned guilt. He was entirely incapable of meeting my eyes. Hovering near the massive stone fireplace was Harper, Julian's endlessly troublesome younger sister. Both of her hands gripped her smartphone, holding it at chest level. The camera lens was pointed directly at me. She was barely hiding her excitement, clearly ready to record my impending mental breakdown and broadcast my humiliation across every social media platform she could access. Victoria did not waste a single second on fake pleasantries. With a cold, calculated flick of her wrist, she tossed a thick manila folder onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a sharp smack that echoed off the high ceilings. "Julian needs a real wife," Victoria declared, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "A woman who can actually give this family a proper heir. Chloe and her newborn son are waiting outside in the car right now. They are moving in today. It is time for you to sign these papers, pack whatever belongs to you, and leave my son's house." I stood completely still, letting her harsh, cruel words hang in the heavy air. My forensic training had drilled one crucial habit into my mind: observe the micro details before reacting. My eyes drifted past Victoria's triumphant sneer and scanned the room. Over the wide archway leading to the formal dining room, a glittery welcome home banner was already meticulously strung up, its gold letters catching the afternoon light. From the direction of the gourmet kitchen, the rich, savory scent of roasting meat drifted toward me. They were preparing a celebratory dinner. This was not a sudden emotional decision brought on by an argument. The banner, the changed locks, the perfectly timed ambush, the roasted meat. Everything proved they had been orchestrating my eviction for weeks. They had been laughing behind my back, counting down the days while I was busy paying the mortgage on this very house. Harper shifted her weight from one foot to the other, inching her phone closer. She was eagerly anticipating the moment I would drop to my knees, scream, cry. or throw a pathetic tantrum. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted me to beg for Julian to stay. Instead, I felt a profound, icy calm wash over every nerve in my body. I straightened my posture, looked directly into Victoria's narrowed eyes, and let a small, razor-sharp smirk touch the corners of my lips. The absolute stillness in my demeanor seemed to drain the energy right out of the room. Julian finally peeked up, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion at my silence. Without breaking eye contact with the woman who thought she had just ruined my life, I unclasped my leather handbag. I did not yell. I did not ask for a single explanation. I calmly reached inside and pulled out my heavy silver fountain pen. I took slow, deliberate steps forward, leaning over the glass table. I did not bother reading a single word of the document she had so dramatically thrown at me. I simply flipped past the legal jargon to the last page and signed my name with smooth, practiced strokes. I capped my pen, dropped it back into my bag, and grabbed the handle of the single suitcase I had brought back from my trip. "Congratulations on the new addition to your family," I said, my voice perfectly level and utterly devoid of any emotion. "I am absolutely sure you will all get exactly what you deserve." I turned my back on them, the wheels of my suitcase gliding smoothly toward the front door. Behind me, the silence was deafening, and the sheer, unadulterated bewilderment on Victoria's face painted a glorious picture I would cherish for a very long time. Stepping out into the crisp evening air, I felt a strange weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I had carried for 5 long years. My marriage to Julian had always been a masterclass in grand illusions. To the outside world, he was a high-flying investment fund manager, a charismatic financial prodigy who wore custom-tailored Italian suits and drove European sports cars. Society magazines loved to feature him as the golden boy of a prestigious lineage. But behind the heavy mahogany doors of our home, the truth was far less glamorous. Julian was merely a shadow, a hollow vessel propped up by his family name. He coasted on the reputation of his ancestors, possessing neither the acumen nor the work ethic to sustain the extravagant lifestyle he so desperately projected. The Winnetka mansion we lived in was the absolute centerpiece of that illusion. For Victoria, that sprawling stone estate was not just a home, it was a sacred monument to her family legacy. She treated it as an untouchable generational asset, a crown jewel that elevated her above the newly rich, and in her eyes, I was nothing more than an incredibly lucky freeloader who had somehow conned her way into high society. I was the commoner, the working-class girl who should be endlessly grateful to breathe the same rarefied air as the elite. The sheer irony of her disdain was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. While they paraded around charity galas and hosted lavish dinners, it was my paycheck from analyzing financial crimes that quietly kept the empire afloat. My steady income covered the exorbitant property taxes, the astronomical utility bills, and the maintenance of the very roof over their heads, yet I was the one treated like a parasite. The deepest wound they inflicted, however, was not about money, it was about our empty nursery. As year 1 bled into year 2, and then year 3, the absence of an heir became the ultimate weapon forged against me. The entire family silently agreed that the failure was entirely mine. Victoria turned it into a spectator sport. During her elaborate afternoon tea parties at the country club, she would sip her Earl Grey and cast mournful glances in my direction. "It is such a tragedy," she would whisper loudly enough for the wives of senators and chief executive officers to hear. "Julian is so desperate to be a father. But some women simply lack the biological grace to fulfill their natural duties." I would sit there, gripping my porcelain teacup until my knuckles turned white, forcing a polite smile while my soul withered under their collective pity and judgment. I absorbed their cruelty because, in the darkest corners of my mind, I believed them. I thought my body was broken, driven by a desperate need to fix myself and save my marriage. I subjected myself to a grueling gauntlet of medical procedures. I spent tens of thousands of dollars out of my own pocket on invasive fertility treatments. I endured countless agonizing injections, endless blood draws, and humiliating examinations in sterile, brightly lit clinic rooms. My stomach was constantly bruised black and blue from the hormone shots. Every month brought a new cycle of fragile hope, immediately followed by crushing, tear-soaked devastation, and through it all, Julian was entirely absent. Whenever I begged him to just go for a simple consultation, to provide a single sample for testing, he always had an ironclad excuse. He was closing a massive deal. He had an emergency board meeting. He was simply too overwhelmed with providing for our future to deal with clinical trivialities. I took the blame, carrying the heavy cross of our barren marriage completely alone. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot who I actually was. I was not a fragile socialite bred for submission. I was a senior forensic analyst. My entire career was built on dismantling lies, tracing hidden assets, and finding the truth buried beneath layers of carefully constructed deceit. I spent my days hunting down corrupt executives and international fraudsters. It was only a matter of time before my professional instincts bled into my personal reality. The shift happened exactly 8 months ago. The crushing sadness had gradually burned away, leaving behind a cold, analytical clarity. I stopped crying in the bathroom and started looking at my marriage not as a failing wife, but as an investigator examining a crime scene. I noticed the tiny, glaring inconsistencies, the sudden, unexplained cash withdrawals, the offshore bank statements that were hurriedly shredded before the garbage collector arrived, Julian changing his phone password 3 times in a single week. The pieces did not fit the narrative of a man simply too busy with honest work. The data was anomalous, and in my line of work, anomalous data always leads to a hidden truth. I decided right then that if I was going to be cast as the villain in their perfect family drama, I was going to script a spectacular ending. The thread of their entire existence began unraveling exactly 6 months ago. Late on a stormy Tuesday night, I was sitting alone at the sprawling kitchen island, bathed in the harsh, sterile blue light of my laptop screen. I was reviewing our annual joint tax filings, a task Julian usually handed off to his private accountant. However, a minor filing extension notice from the Revenue Service had caught my eye earlier that afternoon. My forensic instincts, honed over years of tracking corporate fraud, flared to life. I bypassed his accountant completely and pulled the raw financial transcripts directly from the federal database. What started as a casual, routine glance turned into a relentless, obsessive dive down a rabbit hole of staggering financial depravity. There was a glaring anomaly in our property tax deductions, a massive discrepancy that made absolutely no logical sense for an estate that Victoria constantly boasted was owned entirely free and clear. My fingers flew rapidly across the keyboard as I cross-referenced the federal tax data with the local county clerk property records. The truth hit me like a physical blow to the chest, stealing my breath away. The pristine, untouchable Winnetka mansion, the absolute pride and joy of Victoria and the symbol of her aristocratic lineage, was not a stronghold of wealth. It was a hollow shell. The property was mortgaged to the absolute maximum legal limit. Julian had quietly leveraged every single brick, every slate roof tile, and every blade of grass of his mother's precious estate. But the money had not gone into legitimate investments or expanding his fund. By meticulously tracing the routing numbers hidden deep within his digital footprint, I uncovered a sickening trail of wire transfers leading straight into the abyss. He had hemorrhaged millions of dollars into high-stakes underground gambling syndicates, offshore sports betting rings, and disastrously leveraged cryptocurrency margin calls. He was drowning in a spectacular ocean of toxic, inescapable debt. The most terrifying part was not the sheer volume of the debt itself, but the exact method he had used to obtain the leverage. I pulled the digitized copy of the deed of trust from the county server. The lender listed on the document was not a traditional, regulated banking institution. It was a shadowy private equity group operating out of Delaware, which was effectively a high society loan shark operation masquerading as a legitimate financial firm. They charged exorbitant, predatory interest rates. I zoomed in on the final page of the heavily notarized loan agreement. There, resting plainly at the bottom of the signature line, was Victoria's sweeping cursive, granting full legal authorization to use the estate as collateral. But I had seen my mother-in-law sign hundreds of holiday cards, country club checks, and passive-aggressive notes. I knew the exact pressure of her pen. The loops on this document were far too rigid, the pressure entirely too even, lacking her usual dramatic flourish. Julian had forged his own mother's signature to secure the loan. My husband was not just an incompetent businessman. He was a desperate, cornered criminal who had committed felony wire fraud and grand theft right under our roof. As I sat in the silent kitchen, listening to the rain lash against the windows, a much darker question crept into my mind. What else was he hiding to protect this collapsing house of cards? Why did he need so much untraceable cash on a daily basis? I bypassed his weak personal firewalls and infiltrated his encrypted cloud storage accounts. I was looking for hidden bank accounts or potential blackmail material, but what I found was infinitely more devastating to my soul. Buried deep within a mislabeled folder of old medical receipts was a discreet, fully paid invoice from an exclusive urology clinic. The date stamped on the invoice was exactly 4 months before our wedding day. It was a clinical confirmation of a successful, completely irreversible vasectomy. I stared at the glowing screen for what felt like hours. The air in the room suddenly felt like shattered glass in my lungs. For 3 entire years, I had subjected my body to sheer, unadulterated agony. I had injected my stomach with synthetic hormones until it was bruised purple, endured the humiliating and invasive medical probes, and cried myself to sleep mourning the phantom babies I thought my broken body could not carry. And Julian had known. Every single time he held my hand in the sterile waiting rooms, every time he wiped my tears and gently told me we just had to keep trying. He knew it was biologically impossible. He had purposefully mutilated his own fertility to avoid the financial and personal responsibility of fatherhood. Yet he willfully allowed his mother to emotionally torture me for being barren. The transition from a grieving, inadequate wife to a predatory, vengeful analyst happened in the span of a single heartbeat. In that exact moment, every ounce of love, every drop of sorrow, and every shred of pity I had ever harbored for that man evaporated into nothingness. What replaced it was a cold, terrifying, and absolute rage. I did not march upstairs and confront him. Confrontation is the messy weapon of the amateur. Instead, I started tracking his physical movements using the global positioning system in his luxury car. It did not take long to discover where a large portion of his remaining cash was going. I followed him to an upscale apartment building downtown, where I first laid eyes on Chloe. Julian firmly believed he had found a wealthy, naive young heiress who adored him for his status, but he had vastly underestimated the woman he was dealing with, and he certainly underestimated me. I ran Chloe through the highest-level forensic databases at my firm. Her supposed aristocratic background was a complete, brilliant fabrication. She was a professional grifter, a highly skilled con artist with a long string of aliases, consecutive bankruptcies, and ruined older men left in her wake across 3 different states. The newborn baby she was currently using to secure her iron grip on Julian was the most calculated, chilling part of her entire scam. Through intercepted emails and deleted browser histories, I discovered Chloe had visited an out-of-state fertility clinic specializing in anonymous, highly vetted donors. The child was absolutely not a product of their illicit affair. The baby was a biological business investment, acquired through artificial insemination, designed specifically to trap Julian and force him into siphoning whatever liquid wealth was left in his family trust. It was a spectacular, disastrous collision of 2 desperate con artists, each blindly believing they were successfully scamming the other. My initial, burning instinct was to print every single document, drop the towering stack of evidence directly onto Victoria's lap, pack my bags, and file for an immediate, explosive divorce, but my analytical legal mind violently slammed the brakes on my emotions. I pulled up the state corporate filings for the shell companies Julian had hastily created to funnel his illicit loans. The blood drained from my face. he had forged my signature too, naming me as a co-director and primary guarantor on 3 separate limited liability companies holding the toxic debt. Under Illinois state marital law, if I filed for divorce right then, a judge would look at the paperwork and split the marital liabilities right down the middle. I would be legally responsible for exactly 50% of his multi-million-dollar gambling debts. I would be financially ruined, my career destroyed, while he played the tragic victim. I closed my laptop, the screen going black, casting my reflection in the dark glass. If I wanted to survive this, I could not just walk away. I had to stay in the marriage, smile at his mother's daily insults, cook his dinners, and quietly build a guillotine. My position at Stratos Data Forensics afforded me unprecedented access to a very exclusive, highly guarded network of corporate fixers, asset liquidators, and distressed debt brokers. I did not spend my days merely looking at spreadsheets. I mapped the intricate, hidden ecosystems of financial crime. The shadow private equity firm in Delaware that currently held the fraudulent mortgage on our estate was notorious within my industry for their ruthless, predatory lending tactics. However, despite their aggressive reputation, they were ultimately driven by one simple, overarching metric: immediate and absolute liquidity. They dealt in high yield, short-term loans. They fundamentally did not want the logistical nightmare of foreclosing on a massive, historic residential property and dealing with the subsequent, highly publicized real estate auction. They just wanted their capital returned with a decent profit margin. I reached out to a trusted former colleague, a senior partner at a Manhattan law firm who specialized in aggressive corporate restructuring, and retained him to act as my legal intermediary. Through his firm, I initiated contact with the Delaware lenders. I presented them with a highly attractive, undeniable proposition. I offered a silent, immediate, and fully funded cash buyout of the entire debt portfolio attached to the Winnetka property. Of course, executing a maneuver of this magnitude required a staggering amount of capital. I began by quietly and systematically liquidating every single asset I owned in my own name. I emptied my retirement accounts, drained my emergency savings, and sold off the modest but stable stock portfolio I had diligently built before my disastrous marriage. But combining all of those funds still fell significantly short of the multi-million-dollar threshold required to purchase the mortgage. That is exactly where Julian unwittingly funded his own spectacular execution, by meticulously auditing his investment fund from the shadows of my encrypted work terminal. I identified a series of highly leveraged, fundamentally worthless shell companies he was frantically pumping his clients' money into. They were absolute garbage equities, failing technology startups, and overvalued ghost corporations propped up entirely by his desperate, erratic trading patterns. I established a highly secure, anonymous offshore brokerage account and aggressively shorted every single one of those junk stocks. I bet everything I had against my own husband's financial competence. When the market inevitably corrected and his fragile, hollow portfolio violently collapsed a few months later, my anonymous short positions generated a massive, staggering yield. I funneled those millions, along with the entirety of my life savings, directly into a newly established, ironclad legal entity. I created a blind trust registered under the strict privacy laws of Wyoming, specifically structured to completely obscure the identity of its sole beneficiary and director. That beneficiary was me. My legal team moved with lethal efficiency. The Delaware firm eagerly accepted the cash buyout without a second thought. They officially transferred the entire mortgage note, the predatory interest agreements, and most importantly, the physical deed of trust held in escrow, directly to my blind trust. The transaction was completely seamless, buried under impenetrable layers of corporate privacy laws and non-disclosure agreements, overnight, without a single whisper reaching the hollow, echoing halls of my marital home. The power dynamic fundamentally and permanently inverted. I was no longer the unwanted, barren wife clinging desperately to a wealthy dynasty. I was the legally registered creditor. I became the absolute master of the estate. I held the official deed to the historic mansion Victoria worshipped as her sacred birthright. Every time she glided down the grand mahogany staircase in her silk robes, every time she maliciously berated the housekeeping staff, or hosted her snobbish country club friends in the sunlit solarium, she was completely oblivious to the fact that she was standing on my property. She was nothing more than a temporary guest in a house I could legally tear down to the foundation if I so desired. But I did not want to simply own the house. I wanted them to feel the precise, suffocating terror of losing it, publicly and devastatingly. The loan agreement Julian had initially signed, utilizing his mother's forged signature, contained a brutal, strictly non-negotiable acceleration clause. If the borrower missed 3 consecutive monthly payments, crossing the 90-day delinquency threshold, the lender had the absolute right to demand the entire principal balance immediately and trigger a rapid, emergency foreclosure. I knew Julian was bleeding cash from every possible artery. Between paying the exorbitant rent for Chloe's luxury downtown apartment, financing his catastrophic underground gambling losses, and desperately trying to cover the margin calls from his failing fund, his liquid capital was entirely drained. I just had to wait and watch him drown. I watched his private bank accounts dwindle to absolute zero. Month 1 passed. The payment deadline came and went. He received a discreet, automated late notice from my trust's legal representatives, which I watched him promptly shred and bury at the bottom of the trash bin. Month 2 passed. He began physically deteriorating, sweating through his custom suits, pacing the hallways at 3 a.m, and drinking heavily. He started selling off his expensive vintage watches and taking secret cash advances on high-interest credit cards, desperately trying to keep Chloe satisfied while entirely ignoring the looming mortgage. He truly thought he was dealing with a faceless Delaware corporation that would eventually offer leniency or negotiation. He had no idea he was dealing with the woman quietly drinking coffee across the kitchen island from him. When the 90-day mark finally arrived, he completely defaulted on the loan. The trap violently snapped shut. I immediately authorized my attorneys to file the emergency foreclosure petition with the circuit court. Which brings me to the magnificent, crowning irony of the ambush they staged in the living room earlier today. The thick manila folder Victoria threw onto the glass table, the one containing the documents designed to permanently kick me out and welcome Chloe into the family, was supposed to be the instrument of my ultimate defeat. They had hired an aggressive, high-priced family lawyer to draft a ruthless, independent property separation agreement, essentially an ironclad postnuptial quitclaim. In their profound, blinding arrogance, they wanted to ensure that when I was finally thrown out onto the street, I would not be able to claim a single penny of the family wealth, nor any equity in the Winnetka mansion. They thought they were building an impenetrable fortress against a gold digger. They did not even bother to have their attorney run a basic title check on the property, because why would they? In their delusional minds, the house was a generational anchor, wholly owned and completely untouchable. By aggressively demanding I sign that specific document, they handed me my absolute legal salvation on a silver platter. The moment I uncapped my silver fountain pen and signed the last page, I legally relinquished all marital claims to the property, but crucially, under the exact same state property laws. I also permanently severed myself from any and all liabilities, toxic debts, and fraudulent encumbrances attached to it. By signing their meticulously drafted paperwork, I legally isolated Julian from my own financial profile. I left him standing completely alone on an island of devastating, inescapable debt. He is now the sole party responsible for a defaulted multi-million-dollar loan, and he is the only human being who can be held criminally liable for forging Victoria's signature to obtain it. I did not just sign away a failing marriage, I willingly signed his written confession, his financial death warrant, and his one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary. And the most beautiful part of it all is that they practically begged me to do it. I am currently sitting in a secluded, dimly lit booth at an upscale Italian restaurant located directly across the street from the estate. A heavy glass of vintage red wine rests in my right hand, its deep crimson color catching the flickering ambient candlelight of the dining room. My smartphone is propped up against a polished silver salt shaker on the crisp linen tablecloth, streaming a crystal clear, high-definition live feed several weeks ago. Under the perfectly reasonable guise of upgrading our smart home security system to a newer model, I discreetly installed a network of microscopic surveillance cameras throughout the main living areas of the mansion. Now, I am thoroughly enjoying a front-row seat to the most spectacular, pathetic theatrical performance of their entire miserable lives. The stark contrast between my serene, quiet environment and the chaotic, arrogant joy radiating from my glowing phone screen is profoundly, deeply amusing. Inside the grand living room, the celebratory atmosphere is operating at maximum capacity. Victoria is energetically holding court in the center of the room, her face heavily flushed with a triumphant, malicious joy. She eagerly pops the cork on a bottle of incredibly expensive imported champagne, laughing as the bubbling golden liquid spills over the rims of her crystal flutes. Chloe has officially made her grand entrance. She is dressed in a pristine white designer dress, playing the role of the innocent, devoted new mother to absolute perfection. She holds the newborn baby securely wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket, carefully angling the sleeping child toward the cameras. It is sickeningly obvious to anyone with a trained eye that she is handling the infant not with genuine maternal warmth, but like a highly valuable theatrical prop designed specifically to secure her permanent position in the household. Harper is pacing frantically around the room with her phone held high, actively broadcasting a live stream to her thousands of followers. I can clearly hear her shrill voice blasting through the audio feed. "We are finally a real family," Harper screams into her camera. "We officially purged the miserable freeloader, and this is the ultimate era of happiness for my brother." Julian is slumped far back on the beige suede sofa, looking physically lighter than he has in several months. A sickening wave of absolute relief washes over his face, genuinely believing he has successfully executed a flawless, cost-free escape. He honestly thinks my quiet, unresisting departure earlier this afternoon means he won the war. He pulls Chloe close to his chest, kissing her cheek while whispering grandiose financial promises loud enough for the hidden ceiling microphones to pick up clearly. "By next week," Julian promises her, his voice dripping with unearned confidence, "I will authorize a massive withdrawal from the primary family trust to buy you that custom European supercar as a push present." The sheer, unadulterated delusion of his promise makes me take another slow, savoring sip of my wine. He does not have a single dime to his name. His bank accounts are massively overdrawn. His credit score is utterly destroyed. And the mythical family trust he constantly brags about was completely depleted by his grandfather over a decade ago. Yet, he sits there comfortably, playing the generous billionaire patriarch, completely blind to the heavy guillotine blade hanging mere inches above his neck. The antique grandfather clock in the main hallway chimes loudly on the audio feed. It is exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. Soft classical music plays continuously in the background, adding an air of fabricated aristocratic elegance to their fake victory party. Victoria confidently steps up to the massive marble kitchen island. Sitting directly in the center is an enormous, multi-tiered custom cake, heavily decorated with elegant gold frosting spelling out the words, "New Beginnings." She proudly picks up a long, polished silver cake knife, loudly tapping her champagne glass with a spoon to demand everyone's absolute attention for a formal toast. At that exact moment, I slowly turn my head and glance out the restaurant window. Rolling smoothly down the darkened, quiet street, completely silent and moving with predatory intent, is a heavy convoy of law enforcement vehicles. 3 matte black sports utility vehicles and 2 fully marked Cook County Sheriff cruisers turn sharply into the long driveway of the mansion, their heavy tires crunching aggressively over the crushed gravel. Inside the heavily insulated house, they remain completely unaware of the approaching legal storm. Victoria raises her shining knife high into the air, ready to slice into the sugary monument of their supposed triumph. Suddenly, a sharp, prolonged ring of the front doorbell slices right through the soothing classical music. The entire family freezes in place. Annoyance quickly flickers across Victoria's face at the unexpected interruption of her perfect moment. Julian chuckles softly, patting Chloe gently on the shoulder, completely convinced it is simply the local liquor store delivering the extra cases of wine he ordered for the long night ahead. "I will get it," Julian says lightly. He casually adjusts the lapels of his tailored suit jacket and begins a slow, arrogant, confident walk toward the heavy oak front door, entirely unprepared for the absolute legal devastation waiting patiently on the other side. Julian pulled the heavy oak door open with a wide, arrogant grin, fully expecting to greet a delivery driver with crates of expensive wine. Instead, the color violently drained from his face. Standing on the expansive front porch were 4 fully uniformed Cook County Sheriff deputies, flanked by a sharply dressed legal representative acting on behalf of my blind trust. The music inside the house was abruptly cut off. The legal representative stepped forward, holding a thick stack of official court documents. His voice was cold, loud, and incredibly precise, carrying perfectly into the hidden microphones. "Julian Sutherland, you are hereby served with an emergency notice of foreclosure and immediate eviction," the lawyer announced. "This property has been seized by the primary lien holder due to a massive, uncured default on a multi-million-dollar mortgage. The bank has officially repossessed the estate. Anyone who is not legally listed on the current property deed has exactly 2 hours to gather their personal belongings and vacate the premises immediately." A sharp, piercing shriek erupted from the kitchen. Victoria shoved past her paralyzed son, her face contorted in pure, unadulterated rage. "You are out of your absolute mind," she screamed, her voice echoing wildly off the high ceilings. "This is my ancestral home. My name is on the deed. I own this property free and clear, and I demand you leave my porch this instant before I have you all arrested for trespassing." The lawyer did not even blink. He calmly reached into his leather briefcase and produced a certified copy of the original loan agreement. He held it up for Victoria to see. "Madam, your son leveraged this entire estate through a shadow equity firm. When he secured the loan, he utilized this document. As you can clearly see, it bears your signature, authorizing the property as collateral." Victoria stared at the paper, her eyes widening in sheer terror as she recognized the crude forgery of her own handwriting. The lawyer turned back to Julian, his tone dropping to a lethal calm. "Julian Sutherland, we have conclusive evidence that you forged your mother's signature to secure fraudulent funds. The authorities have been fully briefed." Before Julian could utter a single word of defense, 2 deputies moved swiftly forward. They grabbed his arms, spun him around, and slammed him roughly against the doorframe. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoed loudly through the foyer. The deputy began reading him his rights, officially placing him under arrest for felony wire fraud and grand theft. From the corner of the living room, Chloe watched the entire scene unfold with terrifying clarity. The mask of the sweet, devoted mother shattered into a million pieces the moment she realized Julian was not a wealthy heir, but a broke, convicted felon who had just lost the mansion. Her survival instincts kicked into overdrive. She did not shed a single tear. Moving with lightning speed, she shifted the baby to one hip. With her free hand, she aggressively swept across the display tables, shoving several of Victoria's expensive diamond tennis bracelets and heavily jeweled necklaces deep into her designer diaper bag. Without a single backward glance at the man she had planned to extort, she tapped her phone screen, ordered a ride-share vehicle, and sprinted out the back patio door, vanishing into the night. Harper, who had been broadcasting the entire disastrous party, stood frozen by the fireplace. As the deputies hauled her handcuffed brother into the living room, her hands began to shake uncontrollably. The smartphone slipped from her grasp, tumbling through the air and landing perfectly upright against the stone hearth. The camera lens was capturing a flawless, wide-angle view of the absolute destruction. Tens of thousands of live viewers were watching in real time as Julian wept openly in his handcuffs, begging for mercy. They watched as Victoria, clutching her chest and gasping for air, finally succumbed to the overwhelming shock and collapsed into a dead faint right in the middle of the ruined celebration. The perfect, aristocratic family had been entirely reduced to a pathetic, highly publicized spectacle of crime and ruin. Sitting in the quiet restaurant across the street, I let out a long, peaceful breath. A genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in years. I reached out and tapped the screen of my phone, permanently terminating the live feed and cutting my connection to their miserable existence. I left a generous cash tip on the table and walked out of the heavy glass doors into the cool, bustling evening of the city. The streetlights illuminated the busy sidewalks, filled with people rushing toward their own futures. I felt an incredible, weightless sense of freedom. There was absolutely no regret in my heart. As I passed a public trash can on the corner, I casually slipped the heavy diamond wedding ring off my finger and dropped it into the garbage. It hit the bottom with a quiet thud, officially closing the darkest chapter of my life. I stepped forward into the vibrant city lights, ready to embrace a new life fueled by a soaring forensic career and a massive, newly acquired fortune. Thank you so much to all our wonderful listeners for staying with me through this incredible journey. I would love to know where you are listening from today. So please let me know in the comments. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, please consider helping us out with just a $1 donation. You can scan the donation code right on your screen, or use the link in the description or the pinned comment. Your support allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they can feed their families and continue creating even better stories for you to enjoy. Stay safe and take care of yourselves.